Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the President of the Theosophical Society in America, Dr. Douglas Keene.
How's everyone doing today? Did you have a good first day? We're going to have a presentation. The title is The Value of Joy in Self-Transformation. It'll be presented by Kurt Leland. It's my pleasure to introduce Kurt. I've known him for many years, and when Mari asked me to introduce him, I was very pleased to do so. Of course, I was disappointed when I heard he could not make it here to give the talk in person, as I'm sure all of you are, but we're going to have him able to present virtually. Kurt is based in Boston, in the United States. He's an international lecturer for the Theosophical Society. He's a practicing clairvoyant for more than 40 years, and he specializes in the third object of the Theosophical Society, which is the investigation of unknown laws of nature and the powers latent in humanity. He has edited an anthology entitled Invisible Worlds, Antecedent on Psychic and Spiritual Development, and has published books on out-of-body experiences, which is Otherwhere, a field guide to astral travelers. He's published on near-death experience, the title The Unanswered Question, Death, Near-Death, and the Afterlife, and he's published on latent powers. The title is The Multidimensional Human, Practices for Psychic Development and Astral Projection. So now please join me in welcoming virtually Kurt Leland. Thank you.
149th International Convention of the Theosophical Society. Many thanks to the International President of the Society, Mr. Tim Boyd, for his invitation to speak today. I am sorry I could not be with you in person. I am presently in Boston, United States of America, where it is very cold and snowy. I envy you and Adyar that you have the blessing of warmth this time of year. I should also give thanks to the support team that has made it possible for me to speak to you in this digital form. Let me now share my screen so I can show you a PowerPoint presentation to accompany my lecture. So my topic today is the value of joy in spiritual self-transformation. In order to talk about this subject, it's important to think about the words that I've used in the title. So let's first consider the word transformation. It can be thought of as change, growth, or evolution of one form into another. And it can take place in physical terms, outer physical terms meaning in material substance, such as our physical bodies. Or also, there can be transformation in non-physical terms, an inner transformation having to do with consciousness. And there may be transformation that affects us, human beings, both inwardly and outwardly, our body, our mind, our personality. And it's also possible to think of transformation as happening in non-human terms, also inwardly or outwardly, as in the mineral, plant, animal kingdoms, and also among the nature spirits and devas or angels that are a part of Theosophical lore. Then there's the question of self-transformation. What is that? I think of it as change, growth, or evolution of one personal self into another. Here comes in the topic of psychology, which can include behaviors towards oneself and towards others, also feelings about oneself and others, perceptions of self and others, and beliefs about self and others. Any of these areas, it's possible to experience self-transformation in. Then we have spiritual self-transformation, which is much more the subject of this talk. I think of it as change, growth, or evolution of a so-called lower into a so-called higher self. I put lower and higher in quotation marks because they are really only approximations of what is meant. What is really meant is a self that is either farther away from our divine source or closer to our divine source. And in that sense, lower is farther away and higher is closer to. This spiritual self-transformation can also be considered the process of spiritual self-transcendence. And in this sense, Annie Besant, in her book, In the Outer Court from 1895, talked about spiritual self-transformation as spiritual alchemy, where alchemy is the manner in which at one time it was believed that substances such as straw could be turned into something pure and valuable as gold. In the sense of spirituality, we take whatever is primitive and unformed in our character and transform it into higher ideals and service to humanity. And that is spiritual alchemy. Spiritual alchemy or spiritual self-transcendence or spiritual self-transformation all occur at the level of our ideals and our values, and usually point in the direction of altruism. In other words, living more for the benefit of others than purely for the benefit of ourselves. And also, spiritual alchemy or self-transformation can involve developing a sense of a larger or higher mission or purpose in life, not just the thing that we might do on a daily basis as a job or an occupation, but something that we do that contributes in some way to the development of other beings, especially in most cases human beings, the evolution of humanity. And spiritual self-transformation can also involve practices that allow us to bring ideals, values, altruism, and the sense of a larger or higher mission or purpose into action in our daily life. Now, in my personal experience, after much self-observation over the course of many decades, I've noticed that joy accompanies the process of spiritual self-transformation. And I've asked myself, what is that? How is that so? And I believe that joy is what happens when we realize an ideal, or make values-based decisions, or perform altruistic actions, or discover or fulfill some aspect of our true mission or purpose in life. And when we're successful in doing or living our spiritual practice each and every day. This has led me over the years to consider that there might be something that could be called a continuum of joy, where a continuum indicates perhaps a movement between a very low level of joy to a very high level of joy. If such a continuum exists, what might it consist of? It might start at the level of simple relief from suffering, and often with that relief comes a sense of peace. It might also come at a slightly higher level when we experience satisfaction of a need of some kind, a physical need, an emotional need, an intellectual need, a spiritual need. And once again, along with this joy comes a sense of peace, satisfaction and peace together as a second, higher stage of a continuum of joy. Beyond satisfaction, we might have the experience of contentment. This could be thought of as satisfaction extended in time. In other words, not just satisfying one need or another need, but experiencing a sense of satisfaction that lasts for a while, more than a few minutes, maybe an hour or a day or a week or a lifetime, who knows? And once again, with this experience of satisfaction comes a sense of peace. And then on our continuum of joy, we come to some areas of challenge. So a higher level of joy than satisfaction and contentment might be pleasure and enjoyment. You could consider this to be contentment heightened or deepened and extended in time. But the problem is that often at this point, we encounter excitement, and excitement will replace our sense of peace. There's a feeling of more of this, please, and then wanting more and more. Beyond this experience of pleasure and enjoyment is another higher level that could be called happiness. Once again, a more intensive version of pleasure and enjoyment. Again, heightened or deepened and extended in time. But often, we will try to intensify this happiness. We'll try to prolong it as long as possible. And we may keep trying to repeat over and over again the experience of the same kind of happiness. What develops is a search for happiness, also a habit of seeking happiness, and possibly an addiction to certain kinds of happiness, which may not necessarily be good for the health of the body or the emotions or the mind or the soul. And again, the question comes up about peace. Where is the peace in this kind of search? So both pleasure and enjoyment and also happiness can be expressions of joy, but if they are not accompanied by peace, we may actually in some way be distracted from our process of spiritual self-transformation. Instead, though, I would offer my definition of an experience that goes beyond this kind of pleasure, enjoyment, and happiness. I call it quiet spiritual joy, which is happiness with peace, and always seems to bubble up inwardly, unsought. I'm a musician, and I often experience this quiet spiritual joy in listening to certain compositions of Western classical music, in which, for example, Johann Sebastian Bach was putting forth exactly this experience in musical terms, a quiet spiritual joy. And I think this also occurs in certain of the Indian ragas. So in classical Indian music too, you can have experiences of quiet spiritual joy through listening to music, happiness with peace, and a feeling of bubbling up inside. There may be a step beyond quiet spiritual joy, and if so, I think it should be called bliss. And once again, as with the earlier stages on this continuum of joy, this bliss is the previous stage, but extended and deepened. Again, it can't really be sought. It simply has to be discovered in oneself and allowed. But here we have a sense of profound joy and peace. And then perhaps at the highest level of our continuum of joy would be the experience of ecstasy, which in many ways feels like almost more joy than we can hold without breaking down somehow, either the body breaking down or the mind or somehow a falling out of the experience into the depths of depression. This makes me wonder whether peace is better than ecstasy. And if that's the case, then perhaps bliss is as high as we ever need to go on this continuum of joy. So what is true spiritual joy in the sense that I've been talking about, as opposed to the happiness that just repeats itself and becomes an addiction? Some of the characteristics are that it cannot be sought or invented. It can only be welcomed, allowed, and deepened in our experience. I believe that this true spiritual joy is the goal, quote unquote, of spiritual self-transformation. But the word goal is a little problematic because it implies seeking. And that's why I put the word goal in quotation marks. So it might also be said, and maybe better said, that spiritual self-transformation is related to joy, and that joy is the reward for such transformation. In other words, if we successfully transform ourselves in some way, that will be accompanied by or followed by a higher experience of joy and peace, all the way up to bliss. But it could also be said that true spiritual joy is the means of spiritual self-transformation. In other words, if we learn the difference between mere happiness and true spiritual joy, whenever we experience that true spiritual joy, we are somehow becoming more our truest, highest self. And that is a mark in the process, a landmark in the process of spiritual self-transformation. So I believe that true spiritual joy is a sign that we've taken a step on our evolutionary path. This step could be thought of as a step closer to oneness with our truest, highest self. It can also be thought of as a step closer to oneness with humanity, or with all beings. In other words, universal brotherhood, which is one of the main focuses of the Theosophical Society. Or if the word brotherhood seems exclusive in any way, we could think of universal kinship as the word we're looking for here. Unity consciousness is my preferred word for what happens when we step into a greater sense of closeness or oneness with humanity or with all beings. But it's also, whatever step it is, whether it comes closest to our truest self or closest to humanity or other beings, true spiritual joy is a step that we've taken closer to oneness with our divine source. Now, interestingly enough, the ideas that I'm talking about here may not be purely spiritual. They may have a psychological basis or relationship. And if that is so, then we could look perhaps more deeply into the psychology of an American psychologist, Abraham Maslow, who lived in the 20th century. He was a founder, so to speak, of humanistic psychology. And the basis of humanistic psychology was looking at the potentials of human beings and the motivations to realize those potentials, instead of what psychology had been up until that time, which was an investigation of the breakdowns of whatever could be considered normal as a human being. So Maslow invented a couple of fairly common terms, peak experiences and plateau experiences, to describe just the quality of spiritual joy that I'm talking about here. A peak experience can occur in nature, for example, on a mountaintop. It can occur through listening to music. It can occur through intimacy, sexual or romantic intimacy with a partner. These were all things that he had noticed and observed. It also seems to develop when people are living from their values and taking action in order to develop their potentials. A plateau experience is an extended peak experience. So instead of having the peak experience for a minute or an hour on a mountaintop, we actually seem to be living on that mountaintop for weeks afterwards. That's called a plateau experience. There is a situation where spiritual joy has become a kind of bliss, extended in time. Maslow also coined the term self-actualizing individuals to describe the kind of person who has peak experiences. And the goal may not be to try to experience the joy. The goal is to try to develop oneself, So clearly, these ideas are closely related to the idea of spiritual self-transformation, even though Maslow himself was not religious in any conventional sense. He also invented something called a hierarchy of needs, which is quite famous. It's very easy to find on the internet. Generally, it's in a pyramid shape. Sometimes the levels are delineated by different colors of the rainbow. The lowest level, of course, are survival needs. And the highest levels, at least in the version of the hierarchy of needs that he developed late in his life, is self-transcendence. So in this hierarchy of needs, there are two kinds of needs. So-called deficiency needs. These mean needs that if they are not satisfied, we are seriously compromised as human beings in some way. So extreme thirst would be an example of a deficiency need. And he called these in some of his writings D needs. And then he opposed to this the idea of growth needs, which he also called B needs, where B stood for being or beingness. His idea was that once we've satisfied our deficiency needs, we have the time, the mental, emotional space, the physical sense of well-being that will allow us to pursue our growth needs, our B needs, which are always values, ideals, and often lead to altruistic behavior in just the ways I was talking about earlier in conjunction with spiritual self-transformation. As I mentioned, you'll usually find this in a pyramid, and I like to think of this as a continuum of human potential. So again, I've used this word continuum to talk about a line of development from least to highest, and in this case having to do with needs or self-actualization, and also having to do with joy, since joy accompanies peak experiences, according to Maslow. So what I would like for you to take from this is the idea that this hierarchy of needs could perhaps be a map of sorts for a process of spiritual self-transformation. Now, in the charts that I'll be showing you, I've shifted things around a little bit for the sake of a clear presentation, but not too much. The idea is not that I want somehow my ideas of spiritual self-transformation or theosophical ideas of that subject or Maslow's ideas about self-actualizing to be mutually validating. I'm merely suggesting that there could be some kind of continuum of human potential, and that I have a description of it, Theosophy has a description of it, Maslow has a description of it, and if we think about these different descriptions, we may come to some interesting conclusions that would not be possible if we were only considering one at a time. So at the lowest level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, among the deficiency needs are the physiological needs, which are the obvious things: food, water, sleep, clothing, shelter. I'm calling that a focus, and the result of this focus is really the basis of the need, and so I call that the achievement if you have successfully satisfied your deficiency needs. So if you've gotten the food, water, sleep, clothing, shelter that you need, then the need for survival has, at least temporarily, been taken care of. Then Maslow explains that there's another need for safety, and the focus is on law, order, and stability, which can mean self-control, but it can also mean, in our relations with others, some things that we can safely expect to be true in order to have security. So the focus is on law, order, and stability, but the achievement is the satisfaction of a need for security. Then higher than the physiological and safety needs are the love needs. And this, of course, the focus is on receiving and giving love, and the achievement is friendship and intimacy. Beyond love are belonging needs, and this has to do with the family group as the focus and the achievement of a sense of community. So the final of these deficiency needs is esteem, and this focus involves having self-esteem, but the achievement of having self-esteem is experiencing esteem coming from others. All of these needs, according to Maslow, need to be satisfied before there's much mental, emotional space and time and well-being to focus on the growth needs. But before we go to the growth needs, I want to point out a connection to Theosophy. People who have looked into some of the Theosophical teachings about bodies, energy bodies or subtle bodies and planes will realize that there's also a continuum there. We have a physical body, we have an astral emotional body, we have a mental body. And these actual energy bodies, in many respects, correspond to the same levels that we've just been looking at in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Also, the things that I've just described, the physical body plus the astral emotional body plus the mental body, forms what in Theosophy is called the mortal personality, which is the personality that we are in any given lifetime. Because one of the basic principles of Theosophy is the idea that we have many lifetimes. Of course, the idea that there is a mortal personality also implies that there may be an immortal personality. And my feeling is what Maslow describes as as growth needs, which are referred to in the next few slides, refers to this immortal personality. So now, continuing with the growth needs, he defines one set as being cognitive, where the focus is on knowledge, and it could be said that the achievement is meaning and understanding. There are aesthetic needs, where the focus is on the experience of beauty, and the achievement is a feeling of harmony within oneself. Now, I feel that beauty is too limited in our understanding, and my personal definition of beauty is seeing the light of our divine source shining through something. So whether it's a beautiful landscape, or whether it's a painting, whether it's a person or a piece of music, this true or spiritual beauty, this thing that we seek when we're satisfying aesthetic needs, is really a connection to our divine source. And the more of that we see, the more harmony we experience in our lives. Then we have self-actualizing needs. These involve discovering or fulfilling what could be called life purpose. That's not a term from Maslow. The description of this level was much too verbose for me to quote from it directly. But I think life purpose is an adequate word. We're talking about our mission in life, or the feeling of what we would like to give to life in altruistic ways, in the form of service, who we want to be, who we want to become, to serve a larger purpose in life. And then at the highest level, we have, in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, a need for transcendence. Now, he means specifically self-transcendence. So here again, we have the idea of spiritual self-transformation. And the focus at this level is altruism, living less for oneself than for others. And the achievement is an experience of unity. Not just the feeling of belongingness, because we dealt with that at an earlier stage, but an inward feeling of oneness with other people, even one person, other people, a family unit, all of humanity, all life on the planet. These are all elements of self-transcendence. Now, I added another level higher than this because in the Theosophical way of looking at things, there's a form of transcendence that goes beyond altruism and unity consciousness and seems to be focused on a kind of spiritual mastery and is accompanied by the bliss that I was talking about earlier. Once again, these things can all be related to the subtle bodies as described in Theosophy, where the cognitive needs are related to the mental body and the aesthetic and self-actualizing needs to the causal body. The causal body is, in a sense, our reincarnating soul, and it's called causal because all of the causes of a particular lifetime that we'll have to deal with in karmic terms in the midst of that lifetime are contained in this level of our being. And then there are higher bodies, one called the Buddhic or intuitional body that corresponds with this first notion of transcendence and has to do with unity consciousness. And then there's the highest of the bodies that humanity can achieve in embodied form, the nirvanic or spiritual body. And this is a body of mastery and bliss. And these are what are called the immortal ego. And those of you who are familiar with H.P. Blavatsky's 7 Principles of Consciousness may recognize how they are a part of this continuum. Generally speaking, these things are talked about in Sanskrit terms. So manas is mind, so that's the cognitive level. Manas taijasa is illuminated mind, so that is a step beyond manas and reflects the causal level of being. Then there's buddhi manas. Buddhi is spiritual intuition, or the ability to experience a sense of oneness with all beings. And then Atma is our truest, highest self. At the level of mastery, Atma, Buddhi, and Manas have all come together, and the immortal ego has achieved the highest level of its evolution as far as our humanity is concerned. Let's come back to this idea of altruism. Here are the words of H.P. Blavatsky on the connection between theosophy and altruism. For real theosophy is altruism, and we cannot repeat it too often. It is brotherly love, mutual help, unswerving devotion to truth. If once people do but realize that in these alone can true happiness be found, and I have put this in red so that we can remember true happiness is actually also spiritual joy. And never in wealth, possessions, or any selfish gratification. So there she's referring to the levels of pleasure and enjoyment and happiness where these are things that people seek. Then the dark clouds will roll away and a new humanity will be born upon earth. Then the golden age will be there indeed. This can be found in Blavatsky's Collected Writings, Volume 11. So let's take this apart a little bit. It's fairly common knowledge, at least among theosophists, that the term theosophy means divine wisdom in quite a literal way, where theos is God or divine in Greek, and sophy is wisdom. But we've just heard from Blavatsky that theosophy is altruism, which could also be called selfless service, that it is brotherly love, which could be called unity consciousness, that it is mutual help, which could be called cooperation and collaboration, and that it is the source of true happiness, which is the spiritual joy I've been talking about since the beginning. but it's also a devotion to truth. And one of the most basic truths in Theosophical teachings is that we are all involved in a process of evolution back to oneness with Source. Not just humans, but all beings, and not just physical beings, but also non-physical beings. What this means, oneness with Source, in conjunction with truth, is that as a part of this evolutionary process, we need to seek the truth of who we are, the truth of why we are here, and the truth of who we are becoming. And as we seek for the answers to these questions, we will experience spiritual self-transformation. Now, again, coming back to the idea of true spiritual joy, I believe that it's a sign we have taken a step on our evolutionary path, a step closer to oneness with our truest, highest self, a step closer to oneness with humanity or with all beings, again, universal kinship, unity consciousness, and also a step closer to oneness with our divine source. And in the sense of becoming that's involved with the idea of evolution, Annie Besant had some wonderful and very powerful words on who we are becoming, what our next stage of evolution is. Not so much the human stage of evolution, but what could be called the superhuman stage, the stage that produces what in theosophical terms are called spiritual masters or Mahatmas, great souls. Here are the words of Annie Besant. The consciousness of the masters stretches itself out in any direction in which they send it, assimilates itself with any point to which they direct it, knows anything which they will to know, and all this in order that they may help perfectly, that there may be nothing that they cannot feel, nothing that they cannot foster, nothing that they cannot strengthen, nothing that they cannot aid in its evolution. To them, the whole world is one vast, evolving whole, and their place in it is that of helpers of evolution. They are able to identify themselves with any step, and at that step, to give the aid that is needed. This comes from a book called Man and His Bodies from 1896. It's actually one of the climactic statements of the book. When I give talks to other theosophical groups, I often include this quotation, and the reason is that my whole spiritual practice is based on these words. The idea, from my perspective, is if I can understand even just a little bit of what Annie Besant is saying here about the mind of the masters, I can aspire to try to live in all of the ways that are suggested in these words, in the direction of or towards becoming one with the mind of the master, or perhaps even in who knows how many lifetimes a master in my own right. So, in this mind of the masters, what are the characteristics? The mind of the masters sees all beings, no matter their plane of being, physical or non-physical. Hears the cries of all beings, no matter their needs or sufferings. Loves all beings, no matter their type, physical or non-physical, human or non-human. Understands all beings, no matter their stage of development. Helps all beings to take a step closer to Source. So in a sense, this is my map of spiritual development, my personal map of spiritual self-transformation. Can I do these things? Can I see? Can I hear? Can I love? Can I understand? Can I help? All beings take a step closer to Source. Even if I can only do it one being at a time, even if I can only do it a little bit with myself, I feel that the process of spiritual self-transformation is taking place, and there's an accompanying sense of joy. So the question is, how do we get there? It's through the development of what Annie Besant called spiritual intuition. For this, she used the Sanskrit word buddhi, which she defined as the pure, compassionate reason. So not logical reason, but reason with a heart, reason that understands the nature of all beings and is compassionate towards them, no matter their stage of evolution, no matter what their sufferings or challenges might be. She furthermore said that, but this is not a direct quote, that buddhi is the faculty that allows us to perceive the oneness of all beings in our divine source. You could think of that in two ways: seeing the oneness of all beings because they are part of the divine source, or seeing the divine source in them and feeling a sense of oneness through that, with them. Or in a moment of spiritual joy, feeling something of the divine source in ourselves and having a sense of unity consciousness accompany that. That would almost be the very definition of a peak experience, according to Maslow. So I come now to a point in my talk where I would like to present a spiritual practice based on these ideas. I call it the basic spiritual practice, but it could also be called 4 Steps to Unity Consciousness. I think of it as very simple, easy to remember, not easy to practice for reasons that you'll see, but not because any of these things are hard, but because they're hard for most humans, in the sense that we don't know how to do it, or we have family and social conditioning that prevents us from doing it. And obviously, spiritual self-transformation would involve investigating that family and social conditioning and seeing if we can somehow transcend it. So what I suggest is do this practice daily to develop buddhi, the perception and realization of unity consciousness within yourself. Show up is the first step. Be fully present is the second step. Be kind to yourself and others in thought, feeling, speech, and action. That's the third step. And the final step is find a right, best, next step to take in mutual joy. That will take a little explanation, but there'll be some slides about it. The reason that I put mutual in parentheses is because we can find a step that allows us to experience a higher degree of spiritual joy as a result of having taken it. But it can also happen in conjunction with the collaboration that we have with other people or the help that we give to other people. So what is meant by show up? It's a kind of slang American expression. In the simplest way, it means you have a job, you go there, you've shown up. Or you have an appointment, you go there, you're early or you're late, but you've shown up. But hopefully, if you're practicing show up, you show up on time. It could be described further as the famous statement, be here now, on time and in the present moment. And be there for whatever is required. In other words, embracing all possible outcomes, not having a decision about what you're going to do before you actually come into the situation where action might be required. Also, showing up in equanimity without likes and dislikes. Likes and dislikes are very much what are behind our family and social conditioning. We pursue what we like because it seems to bring pleasure or enjoyment, and that becomes the addiction of happiness. We avoid what we dislike, and it might actually be the next and necessary step in our growth. And if we did it, we might experience joy. Go figure. We go after happiness, which doesn't last, and we avoid dislikes, which could be the gateway to joy, typically human. Also, we have to show up with an open heart and mind. And this is where certainly some spiritual self-transformation is necessary. We have to learn to free ourselves of past resentments and future anxieties in order truly to be here now. So what is meant by be fully present? First of all, be fully present in tolerance, which means essentially embracing all in oneness. No likes or dislikes, no preferences, embracing all in oneness. But also, in being fully present, we need to show up and be fully present in our willingness to learn and grow without any ambivalence. So many people make a decision and then spend all the time after they've made the decision thinking they made the wrong one. You can't be fully present to learn what's there unless you let go of that kind of ambivalence. And some people can't even make a decision because of ambivalence. So we have to be willing to learn and grow and step out through action, past ambivalence, and then see what there is to learn and grow into. Being fully present can also require developing one-pointed mind without distractions. I think in our present culture, the biggest enemy of being here now, and being fully present are our smartphones. So one-pointed mind doesn't necessarily mean one-pointed concentration on flipping through the many kinds of web pages you can go to and social media platforms, Instagram, for example, looking for something interesting. One-pointed mind means being able to pull yourself out of that and focus on something, some particular action, without being distracted back. And also, being fully present requires a commitment to being authentic. In other words, to free ourselves from vanity, any desire to impress, because this, or even to be loved or to be liked, because these things make it difficult for us to show up in authenticity. The third step, be kind to yourself and others. What does this mean if we look at it more deeply? In thought, it means learning to understand and not judge. And of course, this means to understand and not judge ourselves, and also to understand and not judge others. In feeling, it means accepting and not rejecting. And once again, this means doing so with both ourselves, accepting and not rejecting ourselves, and with others. In speech, we need to make sure that the way we talk to ourselves is supportive and not abusive, and the same thing with the way we talk to others. In action, we need to make sure that our actions towards ourselves and others are helpful and not coercive. So in terms of ourselves, telling yourself you should do this or that or the other thing, or you should not do this or that or the other thing, can sometimes be coercive, judgmental, not accepting of oneself, not supportive, and actually abusive, especially when it's connected with likes that are not good for us and dislikes that are good for us but that we avoid. Now, the final one, we need to talk a little more deeply about this. Find a step to take in mutual joy. In action, this can mean moving forward from the present moment. In other words, just taking a step. In service, that means thinking about that step as, in some way, respecting the greater good of all, including ourselves, not exclusively ourselves. That's selfish. And also to take a step that in some ways is a step towards oneness. That, in other words, whatever step you take is mutually agreed on. All too often, we see someone as a problem, we come up with a solution, and we try to argue for or impose the solution to the problem on them, and it's only natural that they resist. And instead of unity, we get separateness, argumentation, and so on. So if we're going to take a step with other people, it has to be a mutually agreed on step. And also the step needs to bring joy, and that can be anywhere on the spectrum that I mentioned earlier on the continuum of joy, anywhere from relief to bliss. So now, that underlined part about right, best, next step, what did I mean by that? In a sense, we'll learn from anything. So any next step will do as long as we take it. We'll learn whether it's a good step or not. Because we have to take steps. We live in a world of learning and growth. We have past, present, and future. There's always a now. There's always a step we have just left behind and another one that we have to take to move forward. But some steps bring us, or you, and possibly others, closer to source. And the result is joy, an expansion of unity consciousness, or a development of buddhi, an approach to what I call the mind of the masters. So, personal or mutual relief means you have taken a right next step. Quiet spiritual joy means you have taken a best next step. Bliss, profound peace and joy, means that the greater good of all has been achieved, and you have taken a right best next step. So in the process of spiritual self-transformation, we need constantly to be looking out for opportunities to take a right step or a best next step or a right best next step. And we'll usually know when they come. And joy is one of the ways we know on the other side of taking that step that we actually have gotten closer in some way to unity consciousness or our true self or our divine source. Now, these 4 steps to unity consciousness can be applied in multiple ways. I apply them first as a daily practice in all of my relations with other people. But this template, these 4 steps, can be applied in all areas of life. Each of these, you could say, is a workshop in personal self-transformation, having to do with home and family, or work and friendship, or partnership and marriage, or organizations and groups. And it's always the same 4 steps. Show up to home and family. Be fully present for work and friendship. Be kind to yourself and others in thought, feeling, speech, and action, in partnership and marriage. Find a step in joy, in mutual joy, to take with organizations and groups. Now, I simply applied those 4 steps, one each to these 4 different categories of human existence. But ideally, we'd have to apply all of 4 of them in each one. But think about the kind of ideas that developed from the way that I presented it, just to demonstrate to you that these things can really be applied in all areas of life, this basic spiritual practice. You can also use this 4-step template to evaluate your progress. Did I show up? Was I fully present? Was I kind to myself and others in thought, speech, feeling, and action? Did I and or we find a step to take in joy? The template could be used as the basis for meditation, intentions to begin the day or the week, the intention to show up, be fully present, etc., in every area of life that you are aware of, that you may need to be in touch with in the course of the week. And this can also be something that you do as a means of evaluation at the end of the day or the week. Thinking back, just as with the previous slide, was I fully present? Was I showing up? Was I kind to myself and others? And so on. And the template can be used as the basis for problem solving or resolving arguments, through journal writing, or in conversation with colleagues, peers, friends, partners, children, relatives. So it can even be taken a step further in the direction of something that I call the ladder of oneness. Annie Besant called the ladder of lives. We can show up to all beings with open-minded curiosity. We can be fully present to all beings with an awareness of their needs. Be kind to ourselves and all beings with compassionate understanding. And find a right best next step to take together in mutual joy or relief. If you think carefully about what I've written here, you'll realize that I've simply described the mind of the master in slightly different terms, using the 4 steps toward unity consciousness as a way of thinking about an intention that we can have towards all beings. And this can be the basis of a spiritual practice that takes us very far and very deep, very far in the sense of getting closer to our highest self, closer to our other beings, humanity, closer to our divine source. And also higher and longer on the continuum of joy that I described earlier. So this, I believe, is the usefulness of joy in the process of spiritual self-transformation. I thank you for your kind attention.
I just wanted to say, if Kurt were here, he'd be happy to answer questions, but we're not going to be able to do that tonight. So, thank you.